Well, today's a wonderful day for our congregation, but a special treat for me, with Reverend Candy Holmes coming to deliver our message. I also want to welcome, once again, her wife, Reverend Elder Darlene Garner, who I also call my sister bishop and colleague. I want to thank you, Darlene, for your service and for how it impacted people all over the world, many of whose names you'll never know, but how you helped shape MCC. And I thank you for being the best colleague and wonderful friend that you are. And so thank you and welcome. Reverend Candy Holmes, I've known Candy a long time and in many different manifestations. I probably first met her at our Atlanta General Conference in 1995 when she led the choir and this amazing, huge conference choir in just a wonderful embodiment of what it means to really worship. I also know Candy. We were fellow students at Episcopal Divinity School and have had many incarnations. We are both very close friends of Reverend Elder Jerry and Harvey. And in many ways, Reverend Candy received her mantle of healing to share with all of FCC. Reverend Candy is also an activist, a marriage equality activist. Let's turn that off. Okay. She's a marriage equality activist, someone who has worked in dealing with racial equality, racism, white supremacy in our country and around the world, challenging that, being an embodiment of equality and hope for so many people and for justice. But more than that, Candy is what I call an uncanny preacher. And that is that you can hear her and 100 people can hear 100 different sermons, each one tailored for you, and that something she will say will stick with you and stay with you for a very long time. I know that gift comes from many places in her life. I'm just so grateful that she's going to offer it here today. Will you welcome our friend, Reverend Candy Holmes?
Yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. I say yes, Lord, yes, I will trust and I'll obey. If your spirit speaks to me, with my whole heart I'll agree, and my answer will be yes, Lord, yes. Yes, to your will and to your way, we'll say yes, Lord, yes. We will trust and I'll obey. If your spirit speaks to me, with my whole heart I'll agree, and my answer will be yes, Lord, yes. Good morning and happy anniversary, SunCoast. I'm so happy to be here. And welcome those who are live streaming.
All right.
Hello. It is my extreme pleasure and honor to be with you again. Thank you, Reverend Nancy Wilson and Reverend Vicki Miller, for this invitation, for your kind words of introduction, Reverend Nancy. And the invitation is not just for now, but I've been here before.
Yeah, all right.
And so it means a lot to be invited back.
All right. Yeah.
I say that because I remember when I preached for the revival, the fall revival, and I recall that my Baptist and my Pentecostal personality showed up.
All right.
And we had an amazing time, I thought, and though I was a bit long-winded, but I reckon I did okay enough to be invited back. So I promise Reverend Nancy and Reverend Vicki, I have given all my sundry parts a good talking to, and I will be brief, or briefer this morning.
All right. All right.
So, SunCoast, you know I Googled you, and there is great stuff on the internet about you.
All right.
You know that some folks do not even know about many places until they Google you.
All right.
And so I researched you, though I already knew about you, and what I learned was pretty impressive. The most impressive thing was this: your vision statement. A church where all people are welcome to worship, to learn, to grow in an atmosphere of truth, trust, and transformation. We do not discriminate and welcome all people. We celebrate an open communion table where all may take a part. That means a lot to so many people where church doors are closed and the communion table is not available to them.
Yes.
In this short statement, you describe who you are and what you are about. You are about love. Love that lifts up the truth,
Yes.
embodies trust, and transforms. Blessings upon your ministry and your leadership as you celebrate where you have been, where you are, and where you are going.
Yes.
May you continue to flourish with all of God's good graces. And before I go on too further, I would like to take a moment, even though she's been acknowledged already, my wonderful, wonderful beloved, Reverend Elder Darlene Garner. Sharing life and love with you is better than chocolate or taking in the most stunning sunset.
All right.
Thanks, sweetheart,
All right.
for being you and for showering me with an amazing love. As we move into this time of sharing, I ask that you pray with me and for me, that all might be open and that I might be open to hearing and receiving what God has for us today. Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving presence, known by many names, our hearts are so full of gratitude for this day and the 24 years you have led and lifted up SunCoast as a light on a hill. Continue to expand their hearts and imaginations that they may see themselves as you see them. Divine ambassadors of love, not only in this community, but in, indeed, the world. Spark in all of us a creative spirit, enabling us to dream bigger, reach deeper, and to be the courageous leaders you are calling us to be. Lead us, guide us along the way. Enlighten us, strengthen our hearts to know love, to know peace, and to do justice, and to live in joyfulness. In your many names we pray. Amen, and so it is. Now, I understand that you have been in the midst of a church preaching series, Follow the Leader, and with an emphasis on moving from following Jesus to doing as Jesus, embracing your roles as leaders with your hearts, with your heads, and with your hands. Now, as a kid, I remember playing the game Follow the Leader, and I learned a lot by following the leader. What I did not learn, however, was how to initiate.
All right.
So I thought that was the job of the leader. And I lived as a wallflower for a good part of my life as a kid and my church life. Yes, that's what happens when you learn those things early on. So today I am going to do something different. I'm accepting Reverend Nancy's and Reverend Vicky's challenge to move from simply following Jesus, and I'm opening myself up to the possibilities of leading like Jesus. So this sermon about courageous leading and healing forward, while I prepared it for your anniversary, I am also preaching to myself. Now, something that you might not know about me is that I have dealt with dyslexia for as far back as I can remember. I didn't know that this learning challenge had a name until later in life. Throughout all my schooling, I told no one about the difficulties I experienced and pushed to become an overachiever because it was the only way I knew how to overshadow what I now know as dyslexia. I developed tricks to know my left from my right. I didn't know as much about reading because I didn't read that much because it was so hard for me. Hard because the words would jump up and down on the page or simply disappear into whiteness. So it took me much longer to read my assignments and write my papers. There was much pain and shame around how my brain would mix up words and numbers. I didn't even trust my speech. But in spite of this, later in life, I seemed to be moving down a path of ministry, activism, and motivational speaking. How could that even be possible? In seminary, the frustration of dyslexia and the weariness of volumes of reading and theological writing just got to me. It took me to a crossroad. It wasn't that I just didn't want to do well, I wanted to exceed. But how could I do that? I had a decision to make. Was I going to follow along from the shadows and be miserable, knowing that dyslexia was taking away so much from my learning, or would I dare to step out and take a risk and do something different? I chose the latter. I made an appointment to talk with the professor of my most difficult courses, and who I was a little bit afraid of. Nancy might know who I'm talking about. And I shared my story with her. Her response was a pivotal moment for me. She thanked me for having the courage to share my truth with her, and went on to say that many students and even faculty deal with dyslexia and never seek help or support. And then we proceeded to discuss ways to support me. And I graduated from seminary before time and even received an award. More than all of this, I learned a great lesson. I got to choose if my past would limit me, or if those circumstances would urge me on to envision something different. And so today, I stand before you still dealing with dyslexia, but it does not define me, it does not shame me, it does not limit me, because my courageous leadership healed me forward. And so today, as we delve into the scripture text, we're going to talk about the woman who found her courage, the woman with the blood condition. It might be familiar to some of you. But so that we're all on the same page, and for those who might not know this story well, I will do a brief overview. This unnamed woman with a blood condition for 12 years, which is a long time. During those years, years, she lived in isolation from her family and her friends and society in general. Women with blood conditions were considered unclean. And according to the Mosaic culture, they were not only unclean, but they were forbidden to interact with anyone until the blood ceased, which meant for this woman, it was ongoing, 12 years plus. And if you dared to venture out, you would suffer the consequences of breaking the law. This woman had to have begun to believe that her sickness defined her in some way. She believed that she was shunned. Not only was she unclean, but anything and anyone she touched was unclean. This meant it was her responsibility. It was on her shoulders not to contaminate anyone. And we know this because of Jesus' response. Who touched me? And the text says, she came forward with fear and trembling. She knew religious law, and she knew she was viewed as unclean. The text goes on to say that she had heard of Jesus, and upon hearing, it prompted her to leave where she was and to find him. This meant going against religious law.
Yes.
This meant possibly being noticed. And by law, she knew that touching Jesus in any way, she would make him unclean. And the very act of touching him would require Jesus to observe washing rituals in order to purify himself. Wow. That's a lot on this woman's shoulders. She had a lot going on. Now, it's usually at this point in the sermon, for many, they focus on what Jesus did and how he responded to the woman, healing and blessing her. But I want to do something different here. I would like to offer that Jesus was not the only leader in this story.
Yeah.
Though it is common perspective that the teacher, the minister, the deacons, the board of directors, even the ushers are the leaders in church. But if for only a few minutes today, I would like for us to delve deeper and to ponder the possibility that perhaps we all have a leadership role to play. And we might be surprised by what this story sparks in us. What must this woman have been thinking to put herself out there like that? Bleeding for years surely meant she was physically not strong. She was financially destitute, spending what money she had on physicians and remedies that did not work, and she was worse off.
Yeah.
And because of the religious laws and cultural norms, I imagine that she had internalized even the condemnation of her humanity. Can you imagine how much of an outsider she must have felt? So in light of that, what would urge her to take such a risk after suffering so much? Who does that? Who does that? What changed her heart and inspired her to do what she did? What did this woman know or believe that moved her from being bound by her circumstances to moving forward towards her healing? These questions call for answers that go well beyond she had nothing else to lose.
All right.
The text provides some insight here. It says she heard about Jesus. I imagine she heard not just with her ears, but she heard about Jesus in her heart and believed if she could just get to him and touch him, and not just his body, but touch his garment, she would be made whole. She was inspired to do something different in spite of all that she had gone through and was up against. She not only knew who Jesus was, she had some inkling of who she was. For Jesus called her daughter. Her previous attempts to find remedies didn't stop her. Societal conventions and restrictions and what others thought and said about her didn't deter her. She left the hidden places of isolation. She pressed through the crowd that would surely reject her. She did all of this because she had an inkling. And I want to call that inkling courage. Whether she knew it or not. Now, Merriam-Webster defines courage as the mental and moral strength to venture, persevere, and withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. With her life as it was, I am sure she didn't see herself as a leader. But she was. That inkling of courage urged her to move forward. I offer that this woman from her humble social location was exercising courageous leadership. She had the courage to believe and to envision a different outcome for herself. She had the courage to see herself as whole. For what is a leader except someone who dares to believe things can be different? Someone who believes and dares to lean into envisioning possibilities over their fears. Someone who simply says, yes, I am willing, and takes action. Yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. When I think of the courage of this woman, I am also drawn to reflect on a contemporary story of another woman who did not see herself as a leader. We're going to talk a little bit about Sister Rosa Parks. And it seems fitting, I think, to lift her up during this time of Black History Month as well, as someone who, like the woman with the blood condition, found courage. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks did what everybody was doing, going to work. She boarded a bus in Montgomery City, and on her way from home to work, and then from work to home, she always sat in the middle of the bus, just behind 10 seats reserved for the white folk. Now, soon all the seats in the bus were filled, and when a white man entered the bus, the driver, following the standard practice of segregation, insisted that all 4 Black people who were sitting just behind the white section in the colored section give up their seats so that the white man could sit down. Now, Rosa Parks quietly refused to stand up. She allowed the Black gentleman beside her to scoot out so he could go to the back. Instead, Rosa Parks, standing up, she just moved to the newly vacant seat, the window seat beside her. She created quite a stir. And this day became a defining moment for Rosa Parks, because God captured her weariness around injustice and ignited in her a strength and a courage that she had not known for herself. She stood up by sitting down. She went from fear to fearlessness. Her spiritual character and heart for justice mixed with the Holy Spirit enlivened her to lead with courage. What is not well known about Sister Parks is that she also had another defining moment before that one.
Yes.
Because in Montgomery, Alabama, black people were required to pay their bus fare first, then get off the bus and reboard the bus at the back. And sometimes when that happened, black folk were left standing because the bus drivers, without explanation, would just drive off. They would just pull off before they could reboard. Now, James Blake, the driver of the bus that Rosa Parks boarded that fateful day, had also pulled off and left her by the wayside 12 years earlier. This same guy. Sister Parks paid her bus fare, got off the bus, as was the custom, and went to go board on the back. And in the process, she dropped her purse. While scurrying to collect her belongings, she saw that the back of the bus was jam full. She could not have gotten on if she tried. And the bus drove off. After that moment, she refused to board any bus James Blake drove. However, on December 1, after a long day, she waited for the bus as usual, and unfortunately the first bus was full, so it passed by. So when the next bus came, Sister Rosa boarded immediately, not realizing that James Blake was the driver. Not paying much attention, she took a seat in the middle of the colored people section, and during the course of the ride, of course, the bus filled up with white folk. And then James said what other white bus drivers said: "Black riders, you'll have to move to the back." And in an interview later, years later, Sister Parks recounted this, that when James Blake saw her still sitting, he asked her if she was going to stand up. And she said, "No, I'm not." Can you imagine? The same guy who left her on the side of the road 12 years earlier asking her to move? Not this time. She would not be left behind. She would not be put behind. And Sister Parks, in her autobiography, My Story, wrote, and I quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired. But that isn't true. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in.
All right.
Tired of giving up." Not only did Rosa Parks not stand up, but even when the bus driver threatened to call the police to have her arrested, she simply chose a new seat. She did something different. And she got a better view, a seat of her choice by the window. She did not respond to the bus driver's request to move. She did respond, but just not in the way he wanted. Rosa Parks' courageous action was spontaneous. Her weariness was transformed into strength. Her strength of character, heart for justice, and spiritual inspiration moved her to another level of courage. This Southern black woman gazed on that great wall of segregation and gained a new insight. She saw that the power of standing up could bring down the wall of segregation. And at that moment, the Montgomery bus boycott and civil rights movement was sparked. Now I know that many of you might be saying and thinking, well, Reverend Candy, I'm not an activist, and I didn't learn to speak up like that. So if being a leader means speaking up and being an activist, that's not for me. Well, Sister Rosa wasn't an activist either. She didn't start out that day, that morning, thinking, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get on that bus and stand up and walk to the section that I usually do and sit down and knock it up. She did not start her day that way. No, she was like everyone else, an everyday person. She was a 42-year-old seamstress at a local department store on her way home as usual. But she did an unusual thing on that day, and it made a difference. Like many of us, we may not see the church or even ourselves as leaders, but more as doers and followers, living a quiet life and doing church as always. But what if there was more inside of you? More for you to do, more for you to be. As wonderful as Reverend Nancy and Reverend Vicky are and other church leaders, they can only do their part, what they have said yes to. SunCoast, your mission of being a place of truth, trust, and transformation is a big vision. And it calls you to go beyond church as usual, beyond attendance, beyond tithes, beyond offerings. And all those things are wonderful and good. Seeing you are a community of trust, truth, and transformation means exemplifying courageous leadership that dares to dream how you can inspire and impact your world right where you are. Courageous leadership is not one-dimensional. It can show up in many ways. For example, you've already done it. Last year, in Venice, Florida, you had a gay pride event. You dared to dream and demonstrate courageous leadership by choosing to sponsor Venice's first gay pride. And what an amazing event it was. People came from far and wide to celebrate with you. Isn't that wonderful? Yes. What you did, your care, your hospitality brought the community together and you made an impact. Gay pride was probably the closest that some people were going to get to church. And you, through your courageous leadership, took action. And I bet you a dime to a donut, next year will be even bigger and better. And you did something else. So you're doing it. I'm just encouraging you to do it more. What about your project for a new church sign? Wow. Wow. A sign is no small thing. Your sign tells the community you are here and who you are and what you're about. According to this sign consultant, Clayton Bumbry, and I quote, "There are 100 feet of no man's land between the church and the street. And people are not going to cross that land unless the church builds a bridge. If a church can display who they are on their sign, then they have built a bridge." You are a remarkable church with many gifts to offer. People would love to know you and to know more about you. Your courageous leadership can not only heal you, but all those yet to come. Every person within the sound of my voice is a leader in some way, even if you don't know it yet. My hope and prayer for you is that you will press past the voice in your head that tells you you're not enough. That you will press past the noisy crowd of limitation and acknowledge that knowingness, that urging deep in your heart. Be courageous. Step out from whatever is holding you back and touch Jesus. You have so much to offer, just like the woman who dared to touch the hem, just like Sister Rosa, who stood up by sitting down. We all can be courageous leaders, healing forward. Let us leave our places of isolation and dare to see ourselves as God sees us. Love with skin on. Live well. Love big. And be whole is my prayer for you. Amen.
Amen.
Now, if you thought I was done, not quite. We're going to do something different. At the beginning or during the beginning of the service, you received a sheet of paper, short sheet of paper. And if you don't have it, the usher will give you another. Okay, so we have some over here that need some little sheets of paper. 3 or 4 people over here. Thank you, ushers, thank you. And while they're coming forward, here are the instructions. While we are singing and listening to music, I'm going to invite you, church. This is a pivotal time in your life and in the life of the church and leaders in the community. As you live forward and heal forward into your 25th year, what say you about you? And so as an act of courage, I would like to invite you to participate in this exercise of faith, courage, and intention by responding to this question and writing a very short response on your paper. It can be a phrase, it can be a word. And the response to the question is, in the coming year, what one thing can I do to be an encouragement or inspiration in my church and or my community? In the coming year, what one thing can I do to be an encouragement and inspiration in my church and or my community? And as you finish writing your response, if you can bring it up to this basket here, at the end and during the prayers for the people, we will pray for our courage.